Hello, I am Rabbi Hugo Kleinberg, and today I need to share with you a discovery that will completely revolutionize your view on money and prosperity after age 45. Comment below telling me your current financial situation to claim this prosperity and subscribe to my channel. I am counting on your help to spread this message of Jewish wealth. During 4 decades of studying the millennial principles of Jewish wisdom and guiding thousands of people on their financial journey, I discovered an ancient truth that has been deliberately hidden from mature individuals. There is a specific age in life when wealth no longer comes from hard labor or the endless hustle, but from the application of sacred principles that turn maturity into an absolute competitive advantage. This revelation will forever change how you view your finances, your work, and your future starting today. I want you to understand something fundamental that our modern society has erroneously led you to believe, that after 45, your capacity to prosper diminishes, that you are getting too old to get rich, that you should settle for what you have achieved, and accept a life of increasing limitations. This is one of the greatest financial lies ever told to experienced, mature people like you. The spiritual truth that our sages knew millennia ago is exactly the opposite. At 45 or older, you have finally arrived at the golden age to apply decades of learning into a financial strategy that combines prudence, wisdom, and opportunity in ways that younger people simply cannot comprehend or execute. During my years of teaching, I observed a disturbing yet revealing pattern. People in this age group find themselves in a paradoxical and deeply frustrating situation. They have worked their whole lives with dedication and honesty, accumulated valuable experience and deep knowledge in their fields, yet they continue to face financial difficulties that seem to make no sense. They live paycheck to paycheck as if they were inexperienced youths, carry debts that seem to never decrease regardless of how hard they try to pay them off, or bitterly discover that all the generosity they practiced over the years has left their own reserves completely empty, creating a vicious cycle of dependence and anxiety which should be the exact opposite of what maturity is meant to provide. Let me tell you about Margaret, 52 years old, a teacher who dedicated 30 years of her life to education, only to retire with an insufficient pension that barely covered her basic needs. Margaret was always known in her family as the generous and reliable one, the first person to be called when someone needed financial help, the one who never said no to children, grandchildren, nephews, or neighbors in trouble. Over the last 10 years, she lent over $15,000 from her retirement nest egg, money that was supposed to guarantee her peace of mind and dignity in her golden years. This money went to adult children who promised to pay it back but never had the funds available, to grandchildren who needed help with college tuition but viewed their grandmother's money as a natural entitlement, to distant relatives who appeared with dramatic emergencies but vanished as soon as they received the help. When Margaret came to me, she was living a painful and humiliating reality, depending on the very children she had always supported just to pay for her medication, a reversal of roles that left her without dignity, without peace of mind, and without hope of regaining her financial independence. David, 48 years old, a civil engineer with over 20 years of experience, represents another example of this invisible trap that captures hard-working, mature people. David spent decades working 12 hours a day, including weekends and holidays, firmly believing that more effort and more hours clocked would automatically mean more money and greater prosperity. He sacrificed his health, his time with family, his hobbies, and his inner peace in a relentless pursuit of financial stability that seemed to always slip through his fingers. Despite earning a respectable salary and being professionally recognized, David discovered he was merely trading his vital energy for an income that barely covered his family's rising expenses, never managing to build a solid reserve that would give him true peace of mind. He was trapped in a routine that exhausted him physically and mentally, without generating the lasting prosperity he imagined he deserved after so much sacrifice and dedication. What these cases reveal, and I want you to deeply comprehend, is that there is a fundamental error in how our society teaches mature people to handle money after 45. Our culture treats this phase as the beginning of financial decline, when in truth, it should be recognized as the moment of greatest potential for prosperity and applied wisdom. The problem is not your age, it is not your ability, it is not the market or the economy. The problem lies in applying youthful strategies to a phase of life that demands mature wisdom. It is like trying to use a child's tools to perform an adult's job. In the sacred texts of Jewish tradition, there is a revolutionary concept called Zaman Osher, which means time of wealth. This ancient teaching explains that every phase of life has its specific and unique way of generating true prosperity. In youth, wealth comes from energy and the willingness to take risks. In maturity, wealth comes from the application of chochmah b'kesef, wisdom applied to money, where accumulated experience transforms into the most valuable and powerful asset a person can possess. At 45 or older, you should not be competing with the youth based on brute energy, but applying decades of knowledge in a financial strategy that only maturity can execute efficiently. I discovered during my years of study that our generation has completely lost the understanding of a principle the ancients knew perfectly, the principle of maturity inversion. This is the hidden teaching that will transform your relationship with money and work starting today. After 45, sustainable wealth does not come from working more hours, but from working with more strategic wisdom. It does not come from earning larger salaries, but from better preserving and multiplying what one already possesses. It does not come from being more generous with others, but from being strategically selective in generosity, prioritizing your own stability as the foundation for truly sustainable and effective help. This rule remains hidden because our modern society values only youthful energy and unbridled productivity, completely ignoring that the true building of lasting wealth happens when a mature person combines decades of experience with refined strategy, emotional maturity with well-applied financial discipline, and relational wisdom with clear and well-defined boundaries. While young people chase opportunities without clear direction, mature people can identify and seize opportunities with surgical precision based on real experience. The Jewish concept of tzedek vosher, the sacred balance between doing good and preserving one's own prosperity, teaches something our culture has completely forgotten. Helping others without first ensuring your own solid stability is not a virtue. It is irresponsibility in disguise that harms everyone involved. When Margaret lent money she couldn't afford to lose, she wasn't demonstrating superior love for her family members. She was teaching dependence instead of autonomy, creating relationships based on need instead of mutual respect, and ensuring that in the future she would be a burden to those she should be helping sustainably. The teaching of the Kli Rishon, the primary vessel, reveals to us a profound spiritual truth that will transform your understanding of mature prosperity. Only when our own cup is completely full can the overflow truly benefit others in a sustainable and dignified way. This is not a selfish concept, but a universal law that governs all creation. Observe nature. A tree needs deep roots and a strong trunk before it can bear abundant fruit. A river needs a robust source before it can irrigate vast fields. Likewise, your financial stability must be solid and unshakable before you can be a true and lasting blessing to those you love. I want you to understand something that will radically shift your perspective. At 45 or older, you are not competing in the same game as younger people. You are playing a completely different game, with different rules, different strategies, and advantages that only maturity can provide. David discovered this when he finally understood that his 2 decades of experience as an engineer were worth much more as specialized consultancy than as a regular employee. In 6 months, he transformed his knowledge into 3 sources of income: technical consulting that paid triple his salary for just 20 hours a week, an online course for junior engineers that generated monthly passive income, and strategic partnerships with companies that valued his proven expertise rather than his full-time availability. David's transformation perfectly exemplifies what I call the 7 pillars of mature prosperity, ancient principles that our modern society has lost, but remain as effective today as they were 1,000 years ago. The first pillar is the valuation of experience, where you stop competing based on time and energy and start monetizing decades of accumulated knowledge. Your experience is a unique asset that no one can copy or buy, something ambitious young people will take decades to develop, but which you already possess fully developed and refined. The second pillar is strategic selectivity, the principle of doing fewer things, but with much more efficiency and return. While young people need to accept any opportunity to gain experience, you can choose only those activities that maximize your return on time invested. Margaret applied this principle when she stopped giving private tutoring for symbolic prices and created an intensive remedial program that charged 5 times more for guaranteed results, utilizing refined pedagogical methods that only 3 decades of teaching could develop. The third pillar is the restructuring of financial relationships, perhaps the hardest but absolutely necessary for your lasting prosperity. After 45, you can no longer maintain relationships where you are always the one giving without proportional reciprocity. This does not mean becoming insensitive or selfish, but it means establishing clear boundaries that preserve your dignity and your capacity to help sustainably over time. When Margaret finally established that she would only lend money with clear contracts, defined deadlines, and fair interest that compensated for the risk, she discovered 2 important things. First, that many requests for help simply disappeared because they weren't as urgent as they seemed. Second, that those who truly needed it respected the conditions and honored the commitments, creating more honest and balanced relationships. The fourth pillar is the financial Shabbat method, a transformative practice I have implemented with hundreds of students over the years. It consists of dedicating 1 afternoon a week, preferably on Saturday, to review and plan your finances with the same seriousness and reverence as a sacred ritual. During these 3 weekly hours, you analyze every inflow and outflow of money, question every expense, plan every investment, and make strategic decisions about your financial future. This practice creates mental clarity and financial control that most people have never experienced, because it treats money not as something profane to be dealt with quickly, but as a sacred tool that deserves careful attention and deep reflection. The fifth pillar is the revolutionary planned tzedakah, which completely inverts the order most people practice regarding generosity. According to millennial teachings, 10% of your income should indeed be destined to help others, but only after 20% has already been set aside for your own savings, investments, and emergency fund. This is not a suggestion, it is a spiritual order, ensuring your capacity to help is sustainable over decades, rather than exhausting itself quickly. Many people do the reverse. They help others first, and then try to save what's left, which is usually very little or nothing. This seemingly simple inversion completely transforms long-term financial results. The sixth pillar involves the application of the sacred concept of gevul, which means limits or boundaries established by the Creator himself. In Jewish tradition, limits are not obstacles but divine protections that guarantee order and prosperity. Applied to mature finances, it means establishing clear and immovable boundaries, with adult children who still ask for money regularly, explaining with love but firmness that your help will now be through guidance and opportunities rather than direct transfers. With clients or employers who do not adequately value your experience, renegotiating contracts to reflect the true value of accumulated knowledge. With relatives who treat your generosity as an obligation rather than a gift, redefining expectations and establishing appropriate reciprocity. The seventh and final pillar is the creation of multiple wisdom-based income streams, leveraging your network of relationships built over decades, your deep knowledge of markets and needs, and your established credibility to generate small streams of income that together create a much more stable financial base than a single paycheck. David discovered he could earn more money part-time as a consultant than full-time as an employee, because he was finally being paid for his wisdom rather than just his time. When we implemented these 7 pillars in Margaret's life, the results were transformative in less than 8 months. She regained her financial dignity by establishing clear boundaries with family, increased her income through more valued teaching methods, built a solid emergency fund for the first time in years, and more importantly, discovered she could help her family much more effectively because she now had preserved resources and wasn't always in a state of need herself. Her children and grandchildren began to respect her more because she was no longer an inexhaustible source of easy money, but a wise matriarch who offered valuable guidance along with strategic and well-planned financial support. The essence of mature prosperity lies in the understanding that your age and experience are not disadvantages in a young world, but priceless advantages in a market that values proven results, solid relationships, and time-tested wisdom. When you stop trying to be young again and fully embrace the power of maturity, you discover opportunities and strategies that simply weren't available in previous phases of your life. There is a moment of awakening in the life of every mature person that marks the transition between living financially like an inexperienced youth and fully embracing the transformative power of accumulated wisdom. This moment arrived for James, 51 years old, a retired accountant who for 3 decades managed the finances of hundreds of companies but never applied his own knowledge to build lasting personal wealth. James lived the common paradox of many mature professionals. He knew exactly how to make others prosperous, but kept his own financial life in a frustrating mediocrity that didn't match his experience and competence at all. When he came to me, he carried the bitterness of someone who had worked correctly his whole life, but found himself without substantial reserves at 50, depending only on his insufficient pension, and wondering where he had gone wrong, despite doing everything society considered right. James's transformation began when he understood a fundamental truth that I teach to all my mature students. The 40-day financial reorganization challenge is not just a planning technique, but a sacred ritual of financial rebirth that reconnects you with your true value and potential. For 40 days, following the biblical pattern of complete renewal, every expense is questioned with, "Does this honor my experience and dignity?" Every income source is analyzed from the perspective, "Am I being paid for my knowledge or just my time?" And every financial relationship is re-evaluated based on genuine reciprocity and mutual respect. This period of deep re-education allows mature people to identify and eliminate self-destructive patterns built over decades without question. James discovered during his first 10 days of the challenge that he was spending almost $500 a month on small kindnesses that were actually disguised ways of buying approval, paying for expensive meals when going out with adult children who earned higher salaries than him, buying grandchildren overpriced gifts for minor occasions, donating significant amounts to causes that touched his heart but emptied his savings account. These expenses were neither planned nor questioned. They happened automatically whenever he felt pressured to demonstrate generosity or wanted to avoid confrontation or judgment. It was money leaving his future stability to maintain a present image that didn't even make him truly happy or respected. In the following 20 days, James applied the principle of personal value audit, questioning every paid activity he performed. Does this work recognize and adequately remunerate 3 decades of accounting experience, or is it treating me like just another employee? This question revealed he was accepting consulting jobs for rates a fresh graduate accountant would charge, ignoring that his experience allowed him to solve complex problems in a fraction of the time it would take a less experienced professional. He was literally selling wisdom for the price of manual labor, a complete inversion of what should happen in professional maturity. The deepest change happened when James implemented the golden envelope ritual, an ancient practice I transformed into a modern methodology to celebrate and strengthen the mindset of mature prosperity. At the end of every month, he physically separated the money destined for savings into a special envelope, held the bills in his hands for a few minutes, and verbalized a declaration of gratitude. "This money represents my applied wisdom and my guaranteed future. Every dollar saved here is the fruit of the experience I built over decades and deserves to be preserved and multiplied." This seemingly simple ritual created a powerful emotional connection between the act of saving and the recognition of his own worth, transforming saving from a sacrifice into a celebration. The results surprised even James. In 6 months, he tripled his consulting fees simply by charging for the real value of his experience, created his first solid emergency fund in decades, established clear boundaries with adult children who began to respect him more when they realized he was no longer an automatic source of easy cash, and discovered 3 new knowledge-based income sources: online mentorships for junior accountants, specialized courses for small business owners, and strategic partnerships with companies needing refined accounting expertise without the costs of permanent hiring. But the most significant transformation happened when James applied the sacred concept of zehut atzmi, essential identity, to his finances. He stopped identifying as someone aging and losing value in the market, and began to recognize himself as a professional at the peak of his competence who can finally monetize decades of knowledge strategically. This identity shift was not superficial or motivational, but deeply spiritual, based on the understanding that the Creator does not waste experience, and that every year lived adds layers of wisdom that have real and measurable value in the world. During this process, James faced what I call the mid-transformation crisis, a moment when mature people question if they really deserve to charge more, if they aren't being greedy by setting boundaries, if they have the right to prioritize their own stability. This crisis is necessary and healthy because it marks the transition from the scarcity mindset our culture imposed on mature people to the abundance mindset based on real value that ancient teachings have always defended. I guided James through this phase by constantly reminding him of a fundamental truth. When you undervalue yourself, you teach others to do the same. When you recognize and charge for your true value, you raise the standard for your entire generation. The methodology I developed for people like James includes 3 transformative daily practices I call the 3 sacred moments of mature prosperity. The first is the moment of gratitude for experience. Upon waking, when you dedicate 5 minutes to internally acknowledge all the wisdom you have accumulated and declare your intention to honor it through dignified financial choices during the day. The second is the moment of conscious decision, before any expense or financial commitment, when you pause and ask, does this choice honor my experience and contribute to my future stability? The third is the moment of value celebration, before sleep, when you acknowledge at least one way you added value during the day, through your experience and wisdom. These simple but profound practices create a new mental programming that replaces decades of social conditioning about aging and decline with a renewed consciousness about maturity and peak capability. James discovered that the more he applied these practices, the more opportunities appeared naturally because he radiated a confidence based on real value rather than disguised neediness. Clients started seeking him out specifically because they sensed they were dealing with a professional who knew his own worth and delivered proportional results. The concept of chochma nistara, hidden wisdom, teaches that after 45 you have access to insights and intuitions simply unavailable in youth. This wisdom comes not just from technical experience, but from a deep understanding of how people work, how markets evolve, of which strategies really work over time. James learned to monetize not just his accounting knowledge, but his ability to quickly understand clients' personalities, predict problems before they happened, and suggest solutions based on patterns he intuitively recognized after decades of watching companies thrive or fail. This hidden wisdom is your greatest asset after 45, but only if you recognize it, value it, and put it at the service of your prosperity instead of giving it away indiscriminately to anyone who asks. James understood he had been too generous with his time and knowledge, treating decades of experience as a cheap commodity rather than recognizing it as a premium asset deserving premium remuneration. The true financial revolution in the life of a mature person happens when they understand they are no longer fighting just for money, but for something much deeper and sacred, the recognition of their own dignity and the right to live their golden years with deserved abundance after decades of contribution and growth. This understanding completely transformed the life of Susan, 54 years old, a nurse who for 30 years cared for thousands of patients but never learned to care for her own financial health with the same dedication and competence she demonstrated professionally. When Susan sought me out, she carried a pain that went far beyond numbers in a bank account, the pain of realizing she had been so focused on serving others that she completely forgot to ensure her own security and peace of mind for the future. Susan's story perfectly illustrates what I call financial caregiver syndrome, a self-destructive pattern that especially affects mature people who dedicated their lives to service professions or developed an identity based on always putting others' needs before their own. Susan spent her weekends caring for her elderly mother without financial help from siblings who were better off, regularly lent money to co-workers facing emergencies, paid tuition for nephews who considered this help a natural right, and maintained a standard of living far too modest for someone with her experience and professional dedication. She had internalized the dangerous belief that asking for fair pay or establishing financial boundaries was a sign of selfishness or lack of love for one's neighbor. During our first meetings, Susan repeated phrases I constantly hear from mature people conditioned by family and society to sacrifice themselves financially. I can't charge more because people can't afford it. It would be wrong to think about money when helping is what matters. At my age, I should already be satisfied with what I have. I don't want to seem greedy after so many years of being known as generous. Each of these phrases represents a mental prison built over decades that prevents good, competent people from recognizing and adequately monetizing their true value in the world. Susan's transformation began when she applied the principle I consider the most powerful for mature people. My stability first, then the overflow to others. This is not a selfish phrase, but a spiritual declaration of personal responsibility, recognizing a fundamental truth. You cannot give what you do not sustainably possess, and sacrificing your own security in the name of generosity eventually harms both you and those you wish to help. When Susan finally understood that ensuring her own prosperity was an act of love, not only for herself, but for her whole family, because it would prevent her from becoming a financial burden in the future, her perspective shifted radically. We implemented in Susan's life what I call the protocol of mature financial dignity, a set of practices and decisions that turn kind and competent people into prosperous ones without losing their generous essence, but applying it intelligently and sustainably. The first step was establishing her dignity account, an exclusive savings account representing her security and future independence, automatically fed with 20% of all income before any other expense or commitment. This account cannot be touched to help others, cannot be lent for family emergencies, cannot be used for superfluous spending. It is sacred and untouchable, physically representing her commitment to her own dignity and future peace. The second step was the creation of her structured help policy, a set of clear rules allowing generosity without self-destruction. Susan established she would lend money only with written contracts, defined deadlines, and interest that compensated for risk and opportunity cost. More importantly, she defined a maximum limit of 10% of her generosity account, a specific reserve for helping others that is separate and smaller than her personal reserve. When that limit is reached, there are no more loans until the next month, regardless of the apparent urgency of the situation. This structure eliminates impulsive emotional decisions that compromise future stability. The third step was the complete restructuring of how Susan priced her private nursing services. For years, she charged rates far below market because she felt guilty profiting from others' suffering, a mental distortion, confusing compassion with undervaluation. Together we developed a new pricing philosophy based on the real value of her service: 3 decades of experience, refined technical competence, ability to handle complex situations, proven reliability, and superior results. In 6 months, Susan tripled her hourly income simply by charging what her experience was truly worth, discovering that clients who valued quality were willing to pay fair rates for exceptional care. The deepest change happened when Susan applied the concept of Kahila Chochma, community of wisdom, creating her mentorship network for younger nurses. Instead of donating knowledge for free, as she always did, she structured paid mentorship programs, combining technical guidance with career development. This project not only generated substantial additional income, but created a professional legacy that multiplied her impact sustainably. The young nurses received valuable guidance based on decades of real experience, and Susan finally adequately monetized her accumulated wisdom. During this process, Susan faced significant family resistance when she established new financial boundaries. Siblings questioned why she could no longer pay her elderly mother's costs alone. Nephews were disappointed when the easy loans ended. Colleagues thought it strange when she stopped accepting poorly paid extra shifts. This resistance is normal and expected because personal changes always affect established dynamics. I guided Susan to remain firm in the new principles, explaining with love but without negotiation that her generosity would now be structured and sustainable rather than impulsive and self-destructive. The results were transformative on all levels. Financially, Susan created her first solid emergency fund in decades, increased her monthly income by 200% through better pricing and new services, and established multiple knowledge-based income streams. Emotionally, she regained her self-esteem and sense of dignity, stopped feeling guilty for adequately valuing her work, and developed more balanced family relationships based on mutual respect rather than unilateral dependence. Spiritually, she understood that caring for her own prosperity is a way of honoring the Creator and the gifts she received, not a betrayal of the service values she always upheld. I want you to deeply understand this final truth. At 45 or older, You have finally arrived at the age where you can combine decades of experience with mature prosperity strategies that simply weren't available in youth. Your age is not a disadvantage in a young world. It is a priceless advantage in a market that values proven results, solid relationships, and time-tested wisdom. You are not getting too old to get rich. You are finally old enough to apply true wealth based on real value rather than just brute energy. Now, I want you to write on a paper the following declarations and read them aloud every day for the next 40 days. My experience is a valuable asset deserving fair remuneration. My stability is a priority because it allows sustainable generosity. My age represents wisdom, not decline. I deserve prosperity for the years of contribution and growth. Repeat with me now. I choose to honor my experience through dignified financial decisions. This is not just an affirmation. It is a sacred commitment to your prosperous future. May the Eternal bless your hands to generate fair income, your mind to make wise decisions, your heart to maintain balance between generosity and personal preservation. May you discover that true wealth in this phase of life comes not from chasing money, but from making money work for a life of purpose, dignity, and deserved abundance. May your maturity become your greatest competitive advantage, and your accumulated wisdom transform into lasting prosperity that blesses you and everyone around you. Amen.